Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out this afternoon. Is this microphone not on? Okay, now it should be on. Can everyone hear me just fine? Okay. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight to our little teach-in about what's been going on with Northeastern SJP. So I'm going to start out and give you a little recap about what's been going on in the last 2 weeks, kind of what's been going on in the last 4 years with SJP, and then we're going to have our two lovely panelists give us their thoughts about what has been going on and kind of situate the situation at Northeastern kind of in a larger context for us. So my name's Tori Perel. I was the president of SJP before we were suspended. This is my 5th year at Northeastern, and I've been very active in SJP for the last 4 years. So I've really come to witness the history of repression of SJP at Northeastern, and I can tell you that this is not a new phenomenon. Ever since the group was trying to get off the ground, we've faced unnecessary obstacles and differing treatment from the administration, as well as pressure and intimidation from outside groups trying to limit our activities. Back several years ago, when we would invite certain speakers who were deemed to be controversial, for example, Norman Finkelstein, our events would be picketed. People would be threatened as they were walking into the events. We would have to keep our speakers in different rooms so that they wouldn't be blocked from entering. In one particular event, a group of 50 people wearing Israeli flags as capes sat around the floor of the podium while Norman Finkelstein tried to deliver a lecture, standing up and sitting down every time he said the word Israel. And there was never any consequences for these sorts of disruptions of our pre-planned events. However, whenever we attempt to do actions on campus, for example, the first year we did Israeli Apartheid Week, we built a mock apartheid wall. We went through all the appropriate steps. We received a permit for an outdoor art installation. We had planned a great event co-sponsored with the Latin American Student Organization to raise awareness about how the wall in Palestine continues ethnic cleansing and the wall along the US-Mexico border does equal social violence to families in that region. But students attending, trying to present this message on campus, were threatened with arrest from Northeastern police officers, even though they had all the correct permits. And in subsequent years, when we tried to do this action again, we were simply denied the permits altogether and never allowed to have this event proceed. We faced all kinds of bureaucratic obstacles when we try to plan events. Our funding is looked at under a microscope. We're not given the same funding that other student groups are given. Our events have been canceled at the last minute with no explanation, as well as in the last few years, we've been facing disciplinary action for some of our activities. For example, last spring, when a delegation of Israeli Defense Force soldiers came to speak at campus, a group of us decided that we would silently walk out of their talk in protest. We did so successfully, interrupting the talk for no more than 30 seconds or so, but the next day, all of our events were canceled. We were placed on probation and accused of a litany of charges. We were eventually found not responsible for most of the charges except violating the university's demonstration policy, which requires 7 days advance notice of any sort of protest, which apparently a silent walkout is included in. We were placed on probation for 6 months at the end of 2013. We were required to draft a civility statement, which is an unprecedented requirement for any student group. Basically, it was a document that the university wanted to have so that they could use it against us in the future if we attempted to use our free speech rights on campus. We wrote us a statement that asserted our First Amendment rights, including on campus, but didn't surrender any of them. This apparently was not acceptable to the university. Although we'd returned to good standing at the beginning of this year, when we undertook the action to place mock eviction notices in student dormitories, which are simple slips of paper that say eviction notice at the top, but then go on to explain the statistics of Israeli home demolitions in the occupied West Bank and the statistics of how many homes that Israel has bulldozed based solely on the occupant's ethnicity since 1967. citing Israeli human rights organization sources. The university promptly suspended us. However, not after unleashing the police departments on us, calling us on our private cell phones, visiting students in their dorm rooms unannounced, attempting to interrogate students. There's a distinctly racist nature of these interrogations as well. Students with Arab and Muslim names were targeted first. The only students to individually receive disciplinary notices were young women of color. And this kind of brings us to where we are today. So on March 7th was when we received our suspension notice, and a few days later was when the students were informed of their disciplinary sanctions. But we've organized since then, and we've decided that this isn't going to silence us. The suspension is not going to succeed in removing Palestinian viewpoints from campus, even if that's what the university would like to see happen. I think our campaign has really resonated with people. We've garnered media attention from all sorts of local, national, and international media sources, from NBC News to Al Jazeera to Amman in the occupied West Bank. I think people are really taking our cause as an example of the larger picture of what's happening when you speak out about Palestine on campuses in this country. So thank you all for being here, and this is an important part of our continued fight against our sanctions. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists who will be saying a little more. First up is Professor Heike Schoten from UMass Boston, where she teaches political theory, feminist theory, and queer theory. And then following that will be Mr. Chris Hedges, who is a writer who writes a weekly column for truthdig.com. He specializes in American politics and society and is an author of 12 books, including the New York Times bestseller Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, which he co-authored with the cartoonist Joe Sacco, and the national bestseller Empire of Illusion. So without further ado, I'll give it over to Heike.
Thanks, Tori, for that history. That was really useful, When was SJP formed at Northeastern?
5 years ago, so 2009.
And so 5 years ago in 2009, and does that synchronize with when the campaign by these outside groups started?
No, it was shortly after that.
Shortly after that.
When we became more active.
Yeah, great, okay, thanks. That's really, I was at that Norman Finkelstein event where all the students were there, and there were all of these just really lovely Northeastern SJP members who were absolutely terrified by what was going on. It was intense. So hi, everybody. My name is Heike Schoten. I'm Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, as Tori mentioned. I have served as the faculty advisor for my own campus's SJP, and I've also worked with students here in the SJP organization here as well. I was asked to say a few words today about academic freedom and its importance, and since this is a teach-in, and since I'm a teacher, I thought I would do some teaching, just do a little bit of teaching about academic freedom and what it means for our campuses. I hope that doesn't mean everyone wants to go to sleep. Academic freedom has become an important topic of late, especially in light of the American Studies Association's recent decision to uphold the academic boycott of Israeli universities. The ensuing controversy over this decision actually underscores an important point about academic freedom in the United States. Namely, and this is under-acknowledged, it has by and large been considered a prerogative of faculty, not students. The defining documents on the subject, which you can find pretty easily at the website of the American Association of University Professors, are univocal on this issue, namely that academic freedom protects the full freedom of faculty to teach on subjects they deem important, to assign what they deem relevant in their syllabi, and to pursue research they deem valuable to the production of knowledge. It's actually, I found this very interesting when I discovered it myself, because teachers are actually just advanced students, okay? It was shocking to me to discover that it was not until the controversies about hate speech and the development of speech codes on campuses that the issue of academic freedom for students became an issue. And in 1994, the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, issued a statement about academic freedom that applied to students as well. So this document in 1994, which is entitled On Freedom of Expression and Campus Speech Codes, states, quote, "On a campus that is free and open, no idea can be banned or forbidden. No viewpoint or message may be deemed so hateful or disturbing that it may not be expressed," unquote. It concludes by asserting at the end, quote, "Free speech is not simply an aspect of the educational enterprise to be weighed against other desirable ends. It is the very precondition of academic enterprise itself," unquote. Now, I think the fact that this document is released in the wake of the discussions about hate speech and speech codes is significant, because I think discussions about academic freedom, like discussions about free speech, while important, can also be problematic. They tend to ignore entrenched power imbalances that impede any seemingly free exchange of ideas among ostensible equals. So, for example, there's a big difference between, say, an economics professor, someone who teaches in a discipline that has quite a bit of mainstream respect, credibility, and market value. Economists are paid a lot. So the big difference between an economics professor arguing in a classroom, for example, or in his or her research that IQ varies by race, on the one hand, and say an Africana studies professor, who also an academic, but who is in a much more marginal field, in a dissident field, a field that had to fight to actually exist as a field, who argues, say, in their classroom or in their research, for reparations for slavery. Okay, now in the academy at least, both of these are controversial positions. Okay, but the first makes a controversial argument from a position of greater status that reinforces existing patterns of racist hierarchy. The second makes a controversial argument from a position of marginality in favor of disrupting and rectifying existing patterns of racist hierarchy. This is not to say that one of these arguments is wrong and the other is right, but it is to say that any neutral advocacy of academic freedom or free speech that does not take existing inequalities of power into account will actually hinder free expression, because it will reproduce inequalities rather than challenging them. So let's take the example of Northeastern University, where we all are right now, and apply the AAUP's principle of academic freedom, and in the process also take into consideration this issue of existing power hierarchies. Now, if we stick to the letter of the AAUP statement, Northeastern's decision to suspend SJP is blatantly wrong. As the students have amply demonstrated, it's all on their website, it's brilliant actually, the violations of student conduct policy with which they have been charged range from flimsy to baseless. Even if they were true, the suspension would still be outrageous. To suspend a student organization for posting flyers in unapproved places or staging unremarkable demonstrations with imperfect university pre-approval is like giving people probation for littering. To suspend a particular student organization for doing so, when similar behavior by any other organization, as Tori mentioned earlier, merits no sanctions at all, is like giving only certain people probation for littering, right? This suspension, in other words, is a transparently political targeting of SJP in a barely disguised attempt to silence them. Now let's add in the power analysis I was talking about before. As it turns out, it's no accident that, of all the student groups on campus, Northeastern has shut down SJP. Like so many other universities across the country, it is responding to pressure from alumni and other donors who want to silence criticism of Israel on campus. Keep in mind as well, beyond Northeastern, the climate of discussion about Israel in the United States. Criticizing Israel is a difficult task for anyone who undertakes it. I think our next speaker might be addressing that issue. Most people don't actually criticize Israel because they're terrified of being called anti-Semitic. Faculty across the country have lost their jobs for doing it. Others have been the targets of deliberate bullying and intimidation campaigns. Meanwhile, to take an even larger view, in Washington, politicians of every political stripe know to toe the party line when it comes to Israel, and that failing to do so will cost them the next election. That's because of the powerful Israel lobby, otherwise known as AIPAC, which ranks with the NRA as the most influential lobbying organization in the country. Then, of course, there's the power imbalance in Israel-Palestine itself. On the one side, an established nation state with hundreds of nuclear weapons, one of the most powerful armies in the world, and a close alliance with the world's lone superpower, the United States. On the other side, a stateless people, most of them refugees, many still living in refugee camps, militarily occupied in the West Bank, hemmed in by a relentless, almost decade-long siege in Gaza, segregated by Jim Crow-like policies of second-class citizenship inside Israel itself, and overall, without an army, a state apparatus, a functioning economy, and largely dependent on foreign aid for survival. All this means that SJP's suspension is an outrage, not only because it limits students' right to free expression. It is also an outrage because it reinforces the existing power hierarchy wherein the Israeli state, the Israel lobby, and pro-Israel alumni and donors are once again dominating Palestinians, those in solidarity with Palestinians, and students for justice in Palestine. Not only then does Northeastern silence, but it silences those already trampled by oppression and marginalization. This is all the more ironic given that, as I have recently learned, Northeastern University Pride, in cooperation with Huskies for Israel, is hosting filmmaker Michael Lucas later today on this campus. Lucas will be screening a new documentary he has made about how great it is to be gay in Israel. Those of us who work on this issue recognize this, all too well, as the cynical strategy which has become known as pinkwashing. Pinkwashing is the strategic use of Israel's ostensibly gay-friendly atmosphere to distract from its policies of occupation, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing. This tactic simultaneously implies that Palestinians deserve such treatment given their savage, backward, and ostensibly homophobic culture. But Lucas is more than just your average pinkwasher. In 2009, he made an adult film called Men in Israel, which featured sex scenes filmed amidst the ruins of a destroyed Palestinian village. He has stated unequivocally that he, quote, hates Muslims, and has called Islam a horrible religion and, quote, a plague. Demonstrating his profound need for a teaching of his own, Lucas declares that Muslims, quote, have been stuck in time since the 7th century, that they, quote, have not contributed to civilization in any way, and that the only thing they produce is, quote unquote, carpets, which he characterizes as their primary means of travel. I actually don't know what to make of that sentence. He nevertheless insists that he is not racist because his major concern is with religion. Thus, it is a big relief to know that he similarly espouses anti-Semitic views. For example, Lucas has called the Orthodox Jewish communities in Israel, quote, the anal warts on the body of Israeli society, unquote. He has also called them, quote, vermin, and, quote, the Hasidic scourge. Now, imagine just for a minute if this nice young person here, as part of SJP, had invited a filmmaker to campus who had made porn on the site of a Jewish massacre, or who had made similarly racist statements about Muslims and Jews. Do you have any doubt that there would be a massive outcry on this campus and beyond? That is how we know there is a power imbalance at work here, and thus that this issue is not simply about free speech, although it is about this too, but about the silencing and marginalization of Palestinian people and anyone who stands in solidarity with them, or even more minimally, is just simply critical of actions taken by the Israeli state. From what it sounds like, and what it seems to me, pro-Israel groups have complete latitude on this campus. SJP needs to get its flyers stamped. But then again, perhaps it's not so surprising that Northeastern Pride is hosting Lucas, for he acts just like the pro-Israel donors the president of this campus is apparently listening to. In 2011, Lucas threatened to withdraw his substantial financial support from New York City's LGBT Center if it hosted events and meetings organized by the group Queers Against Israeli Apartheid. The center complied, temporarily banning not just this group, but any discussion of Israel-Palestine from taking place at the center at all. After a huge pushback that lasted more than 2 years, the center finally relented and reversed this ban. Perhaps they recognized how disgusting it is when one marginalized and oppressed group of folks turns its back on another in the name of neoliberal appeasement of big bully donors. It is unclear if the administration of Northeastern University will similarly come to its senses and realize the enormous gravity of what they have done and their disgusting complicity not only with censorship, but with oppression and inequality. As Tori said today, to echo her words, we are here today to let them know that this decision is not going down without a fight.
I did a people's hearing of Goldman Sachs in Zuccotti Park during the Occupy movement with my friend Cornel West. And we went in a day early, Cornel and I, and spent many hours with the organizers planning the event. We had school teachers that had been laid off and single mothers that had been evicted from their homes. And then Cornel and I went out to dinner, and we sat at the table, and the first thing Cornel said was, "Where are all these so-called intellectuals? They're too busy. Where are the professors of Northeastern? Where are the journalism professors that should be here fighting for the right of everyone to have a voice? Where are the professors of religion and philosophy and ethics? Where are the Middle Eastern studies professors that can talk about the dispossession of Palestinians since 1948? And I think what's so disturbing is their cowardice. Because there are professors here who know, certainly. And I'm sure there are even professors here who know, who have tenure. And even, is your faculty advisor here? Yeah. And I think that that is, not only an indictment of Northeastern, but an indictment of the academy. And I think, as you correctly pointed out, the acceptable range of opinion is narrowing to such an extent that we are now at Northeastern, at other universities around the country, seeing essentially in the name of money, people who are presidents of universities are primarily fundraisers, beholden to trustee boards made up of hedge fund managers. Half of most of those on trustee boards should be in prison, given what Wall Street has done. So I think for those of us who not only care about the issue of justice in Palestine, and I was the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times. I spent 7 years in the Middle East because I'm an Arabic speaker, much of that time in Gaza. It's not just a matter of the right of the Palestinian people to dignity and safety and their own sovereignty, but at this point we're talking about the capacity to even raise issues of justice within the academy. When I lived in Jerusalem, I had a friend who made her money while she was in college going to events like these on behalf of the Israeli consulate, and she would write up reports and submit it and be paid. I don't know that there is someone here today, but I'd certainly know that at many events that I have addressed on this issue, there are people who come essentially carrying on that long legacy of spying. And I want to first begin by addressing my remarks to that person's or those people who do that. There may not be anyone in the room who's doing that now, but it's certainly a very common practice. And I'd like to remind them that it is they who hide in darkness, and it is we who stand in the light. It is we who openly proclaim our compassion and demand justice for the Palestinian people. And we are not afraid to name our names, and we are not afraid to name our beliefs. And we know something that perhaps those who are arrayed against us do not, and perhaps even sense with a kind of dread. And that is, as Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but in the end it bends towards justice. And that arc at this moment is descending with a righteous fury that is thundering down upon the Israeli government. They may have the bulldozers, the planes, the helicopters that smash houses to rubble, the commandos who descend from ropes on ships and kill unarmed civilians on high seas as well as in Gaza, the vast power of the state behind them. We have only our hands and our hearts and our voices. But note this, and note this well. It is they who are afraid of us. We are not afraid of them. We will keep working and praying, keep protesting and denouncing, keep pushing against their navy and their army, whether there are attempts to ban or silence us or not. And we will do this with nothing but our bodies until we prove that the force of morality and justice is greater than hate and violence. And then, when that day comes, when there is freedom for Palestinians and for Israelis, we will forgive them. We will ask them to break bread with us, and we will bless their children, even if they did not find it in their heart to bless the children of those they occupied. And maybe it is this forgiveness. Maybe it is the final, insurmountable power of love which unsettles them the most. So this afternoon, a day when some seek to name names and others seek to hide names, I want to do some naming. I want to call things by their proper names. I want to cut through the jargon and the euphemisms we use to mask human suffering and war crimes. Closures mean heavily armed soldiers who ring Palestinian ghettos, deny those trapped inside food or basic amenities, including toys, razors, chocolate, fishing rods, and even musical instruments, and carry out a brutal policy of collective punishment, which is a crime under international law. Disputed land means land stolen from the Palestinians. Clashes means almost always the killing or wounding of unarmed Palestinians, including children. Jewish neighborhoods in the West Bank means fortress-like compounds that serve as military outposts in the campaign of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. Targeted assassinations mean extrajudicial murder. Airstrikes on militant bomb-making posts mean the dropping of huge iron fragmentation bombs from fighter jets on densely crowded neighborhoods that always leave scores of dead and wounded, whose only contact with a bomb was the one manufactured in the United States and given to the Israeli Air Force as part of our complicity in the occupation. The peace process means the cynical, one-way route to the crushing of the Palestinians as a people. These are some names. There are others. Dr. Izzeldin Abulesh, in the late afternoon of January 16, 2009, had a pair of Israeli tank shells rip through a bedroom in his Gaza apartment, killing 3 of his daughters, Besen, Mayar, and Aya, along with a niece, Noor. I have the right to feel angry, said Abulesh, but I ask, is this the right way? So many people were expecting me to hate. My answer to them is, I shall not hate. Whom to hate? Asked the gynecologist, who was born a Palestinian refugee and raised in poverty. My Israeli friends, my Israeli colleagues, the Israeli babies I have delivered. The Palestinian poet Taha Muhammad Ali wrote this in his poem, Revenge. At times, I wish I could meet in a duel the man who killed my father and raised our home, expelling me into a narrow country. And if he killed me, I'd rest at last. And if I were ready, I would take my revenge. But if it came to light, when my rival appeared, that he had a mother waiting for him, or a father who'd put his right hand over the heart's place in his chest whenever his son was late, even by just a quarter hour for a meeting they'd set, then I would not kill him, even if I could. Likewise, I would not murder him if it were soon made clear that he had a brother or sisters who loved him and constantly longed to see him. Or if he had a wife to greet him and children who couldn't bear his absence and whom his gifts would thrill. Or if he had friends or companions, neighbors he knew, or allies from prison, or a hospital room, or classmates from his school asking about him and sending him regards. But if he turned out to be on his own, cut off like a branch from a tree, without a mother or father, with neither a brother nor sister, wifeless, without a child, and without kin or neighbors or friends, colleagues or companions, then I'd add not a thing to his pain. Within that aloneness, not the torment of death and not the sorrow of passing away. Instead, I'd be content to ignore him when I passed him by on the street, as I convinced myself that paying him no attention in itself was a kind of revenge. And if these words are what it means to be a Muslim, and I believe it does, name me too a Muslim, a follower of the Prophet, peace be upon him. My friend, the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, is not afraid to speak the truth, not afraid to tell us to stop confusing God with America. And for this truth, they have tried to silence him as they have tried to silence you. We bombed Hiroshima, we bombed Nagasaki, and we nuked far more than the thousands killed in New York and the Pentagon, and we never batted an eye, Reverend Wright said. We have supported state terrorism against the Palestinians and the black South Africans. And now we are indignant because the stuff we have done overseas is now brought right back into our own front yards. America's chickens are coming home to roost. or the words of Edward Said, which someone needs to engrave on the walls of this university. Nothing, in my view, is more reprehensible than those habits of mind, the intellectual, that induce avoidance. That characteristic turning away from a difficult and principled position, which you know to be the right one, but which you decide not to take. You do not want to appear too political. You are afraid of seeming controversial. You want to keep a reputation for being balanced, objective, moderate. Your hope is to be asked back, to consult, to be on a board or a prestigious committee, and so to remain within the responsible mainstream. Someday you hope to get an honorary degree, a big prize, perhaps even an ambassadorship. For an intellectual, these habits of mind are corrupting par excellence. If anything can denature, neutralize, and finally kill a passionate intellectual life, it is the internalization of such habits. Personally, I have encountered them in one of the toughest of all contemporary issues, Palestine, where fear of speaking out about one of the greatest injustices in modern history has hobbled, blinkered, muzzled many who know the truth and are in a position to serve it. For despite the abuse and vilification that any outspoken supporter of Palestinian rights and self-determination earns for him or herself, the truth deserves to be spoken, represented by an unafraid and compassionate intellectual. And some of the last words of Rachel Corrie to her parents. I'm witnessing this chronic, insidious genocide, and I'm really scared and questioning my fundamental belief in the goodness of human nature. This has to stop. I think it is a good idea for us to drop everything and devote our lives to making this stop. I don't think it's an extremist thing to do anymore. I still really want to dance around to Pat Benatar and have boyfriends and make comics for my coworkers, but I also want this to stop. Disbelief and horror is what I feel. Disappointment. I am disappointed that this is the base reality of our world and that we, in fact, participate in it. This is not at all what I asked for when I came into this world. This is not at all what the people here asked for when they came into this world. This is not the world you and Dad wanted me to come into when you decided to have me. This is not what I meant when I looked at Capitol Lake and said, this is the wide world and I'm coming to it. I did not mean that I was coming into a world where I could live a comfortable life and possibly with no effort at all, exist in complete unawareness of my participation in genocide. More big explosions in the distance outside. When I come back from Palestine, I probably will have nightmares and constantly feel guilty for not being here. But I can channel that into more work. Coming here is one of the better things I've ever done. So when I sound crazy, or if the Israeli military should break with their racist tendency not to injure white people, please pin the reason squarely on the fact that I am in the midst of a genocide, which I am also indirectly supporting, and for which my government is largely responsible. And if this is what it means to be a Christian, and I believe it does, to speak in the voice of Jeremiah Wright, Edward Said, or Rachel Corrie, to remember and take upon us the pain and injustice of others, then name me a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ. And what of the long line of Jewish prophets that run from Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Amos to Hannah Arendt? who reminded the world when the state of Israel was founded that the injustice meted out to Jews could not be rectified by an injustice meted out to the Palestinians. What of our own Jewish prophets? Noam Chomsky, Norman Finkelstein, outcasts like all prophets. What of Uri Avneri or the Israeli poet Aharon Shabtai, who writes in his poem Ripon, the Polish town his father escaped from during the pogroms, these words: "These creatures in helmets and khakis, I say to myself, aren't Jews, in the truest sense of the word. A Jew doesn't dress himself up with weapons like jewelry, doesn't believe in the barrel of a gun aimed at a target, but in the thumb of the child who was shot at, in the house through which he comes and goes, not in the charge that blows it apart. The coarse soul and iron fist he scorns by nature. He lifts his eyes not to the officer or the soldier with his finger on the trigger, but to justice. And he cries out for compassion. Therefore, he won't steal land from its people and will not starve them in camps. The voice calling for expulsion is heard from the hoarse throat of the oppressor, a sure sign that the Jew has entered a foreign country, and like Umberto Saba, gone into hiding within his own city. Because of voices like these, Father, at age 16, with your family, you fled Ripon. Now, here, Ripon is your son. And if to be a Jew means this, and I believe it does, name me a Jew. Name us all, Muslims and Christians and Jews. Name us as human beings who believe that when one of us suffers, all of us suffer, that we never have to ask for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for us all. But the tears of the mother in Gaza are our tears, that the wails of the bloodied children in the Shifa hospital are the wails of our own children. Let me close with one last name. Let me name those who send tanks and fighter jets to bomb concrete hovels in Gaza, with families crouching, helpless inside. Let me name those who deny children the right to a childhood, and the sick a right to care. Those who torture, those who carry out assassinations, whether in hotel rooms in Dubai or on the streets of Gaza City. Those who deny the hungry food, the oppressed justice, and foul the truth with official propaganda and state lies. Let me call them, not by their honorific titles and positions of power, but by the name they have earned for themselves by draining the blood of the innocent into the sands of Gaza. Let me name them for who they are: terrorists. Thank you.